A young boy woke in the middle of the night to the sound of his curtains that surrounded his bed swinging violently from side to side, so hard they were nearly coming off the rail. He was so scared all he wanted to do was scream, but he realised he couldn't move. There was so much pressure on his chest. Whatever it was so heavy he could barely breathe. Shaking and terrified, he looked down, and he couldn't believe what he saw grinning back at him. Now, there are many stories of Boggarts in Manchester, and a few people I've met are adamant the stories are true. And most stories are tied to children, as Boggarts are drawn towards children, and since the 18th century, reported cases of missing children in Boggart Hole Clough are numerous. But as I'm not a massive fan of death and injury of children, I'll be telling you a different allegedly true tale of Manchester's famous fae. Some of you will only have heard of a Boggart from a certain book of a magical wizard from a famous school, but I promise you, stories of Boggarts are much, much older. Strangely, they only seem to appear in the north, particularly Lancashire. Inside Manchester lies an ancient woodland called Boggart Hole Clough, a dense woodland that covers 170 acres, and it has been here since the Bronze Age, the last spiritual connections of time gone by. The clough is also supposed to be haunted and have witches wandering among the trees. And it can be an eerie place to be at times, especially when it's dark. The clough, by the way, is a local word that means steep-sided wooded ravine or valley. Boggart is said to be from the Scandinavian word Bargeist, means spirit of the woods, and records also use the term Boggart for supernatural creatures like goblins, but it is agreed Boggarts are like the Scottish brownie and are part of the fae folk. And as he walked up the track road back to his farm, the old farmer saw his milkmaid running, screaming from the cowshed back towards the house. Seeing the commotion, he stormed towards the cowshed, half expecting what he would find as he reached the half-open door. He slowed his pace and raised his stick, placing the end of it on the red, flaky paint of the wooden door. He pushed it open, and as his eyes adjusted to the light, he could see an overturned milking stool on its side with a leg cut off, and all the milk had been collected that day had been thrown all over the walls and was dripping from the beams above his head that supported the roof. Just then, he heard the door slam. He turned to see the milkmaid storming off towards the path away from the farm. His wife was following her, pleading for her to stay. He just shook his head. Farm hands and workers didn't stay long on Bell's farm. On this farm, anyone who stayed there were tormented night after night by something creeping round the farm. Mr. Bell walked over to his wife and the hysterical maid. He heard her say, "If it isn't bad enough waking up here on the floor with the pillow beneath my feet, now this. I'm not staying here and you are mad to do so." That night, after the house was locked up and everyone was in bed, crashing could be heard from the kitchen. Earthenware and pewter plates were being thrown around the kitchen. The children, terrified, ran into their parents' bedroom and climbed under the covers. Just as the smashing sounds from below had stopped, thudding started. Thud, thud. Mr. Bell realised what the sound was, and in the darkness raced for the door. It was the footsteps, heavy footsteps of someone climbing up the stairs. Slowly and menacingly they came and stopped just outside the bedroom door. The old farmer had his back firmly against the door, waiting for a fury to be unleashed as the intruder would try to get in. But nothing. After a long silence, the handle gave a tiny jiggle, and with a crackling laugh, the footsteps bounded down the stairs. The farmer and his wife barely slept that night and lay with their children, waiting for the sun to rise. But when they went downstairs in the morning, nothing was broken and everything was in its proper place. And this is how it went, nearly the same every night. The Boggart lived in a board in the wall of the kitchen, and there was a knot hole in the board, and one day the farmer's youngest boy was pushing the tip of a shoehorn into the hole. and the horn would fire out again. Seeing this as a game, the little boy pushed in the horn over and over, and each time it would fire out. In his curiosity, the little boy put his finger in the hole, exploring like children do, but then there was a great cackle and the boy screamed. The boggart had grabbed his finger and held him fast. The family came running and pulled on the child, trying to get the boy free. They begged and pleaded with the creature, but nothing worked. The boggart just held on to the finger, laughing. The boy stood there for days, with his father sleeping on the floor next to him, just in case the boggart tried anything with the child while the house slept. Every day there was something new. Milk spilled, eggs broken, banging and smashing in the night, legs cut off furniture, food thrown on the floor. But matters reached a crisis, and would be the straw that broke, with the couple unable to take this torment any longer. During the night, one of Mr. Bell's sons was woken. His eyes adjusted to the dark. He noticed movement, and the sound of his curtain that surrounded the bed was swinging violently from side to side, like something was swinging off them. They clattered so hard they sounded like they were going to come off the rail. Sinking below his covers, he tried to hide his face, but he pulled and pulled on the sheets, but he couldn't move them, or move himself. There was so much pressure on his chest. Now he could barely breathe. He looked down, and he was staring straight into the eyes of a grinning boggart. With everything he had, he let out an almighty scream, and all at once, the weight was gone. He pulled the covers over his head and his parents flew into the room. The following days after this incident, Mr. Bell had arranged to transfer to another farm, and with the help of all the labourers he had left, they packed all their furniture and belongings into 2 wagons, and they left the farm immediately after breakfast. The first wagon set off, with the farmer and his family aboard the second. As they left, he turned to his wife and said, I will quote the next part, as it uses local dialect. "Thank God," he said, as they turned from the door. "We've flitten at last." "Yes," cried a tiny voice they knew all too well from the depths of a churn placed in the last wagon. "Yes, and I'm a flitting wi' ye." "Od rot thee," cried the dismayed farmer. "If I'd a known thou'd be flitting too, I wouldn't have stirred a peg." Nay, nay," he said to his wife, "it's no use. We may as well turn back again to Thowd House, has been tormented in another not so convenient." The story goes from here that the farmer and his family unpacked everything and put the house to rights, and the boggart realised the precariousness of his home and the family he shared it with, and from that day on never disturbed the peace of the family and even helped with the chores around the farm. The first account I can find of this story is in 1842, but it appears many times in many books over the years. The old farmhouse has long since crumbled into the woods and is almost entirely encapsulated by dark foliage. And if you are curious to know how he can leave his farm, he's probably a tenant farmer for one of the old halls, either Booth Hall or Buckley Hall. And so you know a tenant farmer doesn't own the farm, the lord of the hall does, so they sort of rent the farm and stay on the land on the owner's whim. Growing up as a child, one of the worst boggarty creatures I can remember, and what terrified me, was a water boggart, also known as a water witch, called Ginny Greenteeth. She would live in stagnant water when it's covered with the green slime and weeds, and should just be there waiting, just below the surface, ready to reach up with the long spindly fingers, ready to grab a child and pull them down. As a kid, when looking in these waters, I'd always be waiting to see a face looking back. Well, that'll do it for today. I know that one was a little bit different, but if you enjoyed that, let me know in the comments below. Maybe you want me to do a few more tales like this one. Until next time, see you then.